60 years of shared morning coffee, crossword puzzles, and companionable silence. 60 years of Christmas mornings and summer vacations. 60 years of doctor appointments, tax returns, and taking out the garbage on Tuesdays. 60 years, and then Meredith Parker happened. I first noticed something was different when Harold started coming home from his weekly chess club with a spring in his step that belied his 82 years. At first, I was pleased. Aging isn't for the faint of heart. Our bodies betray us in countless small ways, and anything that brings joy becomes precious. So when my husband of 6 decades started humming in the shower again, I was grateful. "Chess must be going well," I said one Thursday evening as he returned, cheeks flushed in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Oh yes, quite well," he replied, not quite meeting my eyes. "Thomas is improving, but he still telegraphs his moves." I nodded and returned to my novel, ignoring the slight tremor in his hands as he hung up his coat. After so many years together, you develop a sense for disruption in your shared rhythm. Something was different, but I tucked the observation away, unwilling to examine it too closely. When the text message appeared on his phone 2 weeks later, I wasn't snooping. Not really. Harold had asked me to check his messages for a response from our grandson about Sunday dinner. The name caught my attention first, Meredith, with a small chess pawn emoji beside it. Then the words, "Still thinking about yesterday. You make me feel 20 years younger. Same time next week?" I stared at the screen, my hand suddenly unsteady. 20 years younger would still make her 60. Not some floozy then. I placed the phone exactly where I'd found it and walked to the kitchen window, gazing out at the garden I'd tended for nearly 40 years in this house. The rose bushes needed pruning. Such an ordinary observation in the face of extraordinary disruption. That night, I watched Harold as he performed his bedtime rituals, hanging his sweater on the bedroom chair, setting his reading glasses on the nightstand, smoothing his side of the bedspread before climbing in. The familiar choreography of a shared life. I wondered if he'd performed similar routines with her, whoever she was. "Is everything all right, Margaret?" he asked, catching me watching him. "You're very quiet tonight." "Just tired," I replied, the lie sitting strangely on my tongue. We'd promised honesty all those years ago. Another vow that apparently meant less than I'd thought. For 3 weeks, I said nothing. I watched and waited, gathering evidence like a prosecutor building a case. The Thursday absences stretched longer. New cologne appeared in our bathroom. He changed his email password. Small betrayals paving the way for the larger one. I could have confronted him immediately, demanded explanations, thrown his clothes on the lawn like some wronged wife in a television drama. But after 60 years, you learn patience. You learn to consider your response carefully, because it will shape whatever remains of your life. So I waited, and I planned. First, I called our lawyer, Benjamin, who had helped us update our will after Harold's heart scare 5 years earlier. I asked detailed questions about our assets, about property divisions and retirement accounts. Benjamin was too professional to ask why, but his careful tone revealed his concerns. "Everything is joint," he reminded me. "Has been since the beginning." "Yes," I replied. "That's what I thought." Next, I visited our bank and our financial advisor, gathering information and considering options. I didn't make changes, not yet, but I understood what could be done if necessary. Then I called our children, David in Boston and Elizabeth in Chicago, and invited them home for a weekend visit, just because it's been too long. I needed to see their faces, to remind myself of what Harold and I had built together, before deciding what to do next. While waiting for these pieces to align, I followed Harold to chess club. I wore a headscarf and sunglasses, feeling ridiculous but determined. The community center housed various activities on Thursday afternoons. Chess club, yes, but also watercolor classes, Tai Chi, and a book discussion group. Harold entered, nodded to the elderly gentleman at the front desk, and then walked straight, past the room where chess tables were set up. Instead, he continued down the hall and out a side door, where a silver-haired woman waited by a blue sedan. Meredith, I presumed. She was elegant, tall and slim, with a stylish bob and red lipstick. She smiled when she saw Harold, touching his cheek in a gesture so intimate I had to look away. They drove off together, and I stood in the community center parking lot feeling simultaneously ancient and childlike, a fool at 79. The weekend our children visited was a masterclass in deception. Mine, not Harold's. I maintained normalcy, baking Elizabeth's favorite cookies and discussing David's latest promotion. Harold seemed relieved by the distraction, more animated than he'd been at home in months. On Saturday night, after our children had gone to bed, in their childhood rooms, Harold and I sat on the porch swing that had witnessed hundreds of summer evenings. "This was a wonderful idea," he said, patting my hand. "Having the kids home." I looked at his familiar profile, at the man who had held my hand through childbirth and chemotherapy, who had promised to love me until death parted us, and who now spent Thursday afternoons with a woman in a blue sedan. "I've always had good ideas," I replied. "You just haven't always noticed them." Something in my tone must have alerted him. He turned to study my face, confusion giving way to a dawning apprehension. "Margaret." "Not tonight," I interrupted softly. "Not while the children are here. But we need to talk, Harold. When they leave." He aged before my eyes, shoulders slumping as he nodded. "Yes, I suppose we do." After our children departed Sunday evening, Harold sat heavily in his recliner, hands resting on his knees like an old man waiting for a bus. Or a verdict. "Her name is Meredith," he said without preamble. "She teaches watercolors at the community center." "I know," I replied, surprising him. "I followed you last Thursday." He winced. "I didn't mean for this to happen, Margaret." "No, one ever does," I said, surprised by the calm in my voice. "That's what makes it so ordinary, Harold. So disappointingly common." "There's nothing common about how I feel," he protested, a flash of the stubborn man I'd married emerging. "After all these years, I didn't expect to feel alive again." The word struck like a slap. Had he been something else with me all this time? Dead inside while going through the motions of our life together? "And what am I in this scenario?" I asked. "The ball and chain? The obligation? The habit you couldn't break until Meredith offered something more exciting?" "No. Margaret, no, you're my life, my whole life. Except on Thursdays," I said quietly. He had no response to that. "What do you want, Harold? To leave? To continue this arrangement? To pretend I don't know? Tell me what you imagine happens now." His eyes filled with tears, his hands twisting, together in a gesture I recognized from every difficult conversation we'd ever had. "I don't know," he whispered. "I never thought beyond the moment." That, at least, I believed. "Well, I have," I said, standing up. "I've thought about it quite carefully." I walked to the side table and removed an envelope I'd placed there earlier. "These are the options as I see them." Harold took the envelope with trembling hands, opening it to find several neatly typed pages. "Option 1, I said as he began to read. "Divorce. I've outlined a fair division of assets. You'll notice I'm keeping the house. The children will be devastated. Our friends will be scandalized. And you'll spend your remaining years explaining why you threw away 6 decades of marriage for a watercolor teacher. But you'll be free to see Meredith whenever you like." His face paled as he turned to the second page. "Option 2, I continued. "You end things with Meredith immediately. We attend marriage counseling. You spend the next several years rebuilding my trust while we attempt to salvage what remains of our relationship. There will be no more chess club. Your phone and email will be open to me at all times. It will be difficult, probably painful, but possibly worthwhile. He nodded slowly, turning to the third page. Option 3, I said, my voice catching slightly. My response? This page was different. Not typed, but handwritten, filling both sides with my careful penmanship. What is this? He asked, looking up in confusion. That, I said, is my application to the watercolor class at the community center, the one Meredith teaches. I submitted it yesterday. Harold's expression shifted from confusion to shock. You're going to confront her? No, I replied. I'm going to paint. I'm going to learn something new at 79 years old. I'm going to develop my own interests and my own relationships, independent of you. I sat down across from him, suddenly weary but determined. For 60 years, I've organized my life around yours. I've been your wife, our children's mother, this home's caretaker. I've been proud of those roles. I've cherished them. But somewhere along the way, I think I forgot to be Margaret. I don't understand, Harold said, still clutching the pages. Option 3 is that I forgive you, I explained gently. Not because what you did is forgivable, but because I refuse to let your weakness define my remaining years. I won't divorce you, Harold. I won't spend our children's inheritance on lawyers. I won't throw away the good in our 6 decades together. But things will be different, I continued. I'm opening my own bank account tomorrow. I'm taking that painting class and the Italian cooking series at the community college. Next month, I'm visiting Elizabeth in Chicago, alone. I'm reclaiming pieces of myself that I set aside to be your wife. You're leaving me? He asked, his voice small. No, I said firmly. I'm choosing to stay. But I'm staying as a whole person, not as an extension of you. That's my response to your betrayal, Harold. Not divorce, not bitter surveillance, but becoming more fully myself. I stood up, suddenly eager to be alone with my thoughts. You have until morning to decide which option you prefer. I'll be sleeping in the guest room tonight. As I reached the doorway, I turned back to look at my husband, smaller somehow in his familiar chair, the pages limp in his hands. And Harold, Meredith isn't your last chance at feeling alive. That's a choice you make every day, affair or no affair. I intend to feel vibrantly alive until they put me in the ground. I'd prefer to do that with you, but that's up to you now. 3 days later, I walked into the community center, canvas tote bag over my shoulder containing the supplies from the materials list. My heart hammered as I approached room 107, but I held my head high. Whatever happened next, whether Harold had chosen option 1, 2, or 3, I was moving forward as Margaret. Not just Harold's wife, not just David and Elizabeth's mother, but Margaret Collins, watercolor student, Italian cook in training, Chicago traveler. What my husband hadn't expected when he cheated on me after 60 years of marriage was that his betrayal would finally set me free. I took a deep breath before opening the door to room 107. Part of me still couldn't believe I was doing this, walking straight into the lair of the woman who had been with my husband. But another part, a stronger part that had awakened after decades of dormancy, propelled me forward. The classroom was arranged in a semicircle of easels facing a central demonstration table. About a dozen students, mostly women around my age, but a few younger faces too, were settling in, arranging brushes and paper with varying degrees of confidence. And there at the front stood Meredith Parker. Seeing her up close, I understood immediately what had drawn Harold to her. She wasn't conventionally beautiful, but she possessed a magnetic quality, a brightness, an energy that seemed to illuminate the space around her. Her silver bob was cut in a sharp, modern style that emphasized her high cheekbones. She wore a paint-splattered smock over a simple black turtleneck, and multiple colorful bracelets jangled as she arranged materials on her table. "Welcome, everyone," she said, her voice warm and slightly husky. "I see some familiar faces and some new ones. We're going to have a wonderful 8 weeks together exploring the joy of watercolors. Her eyes scanned the room and briefly passed over me without a flicker of recognition. Of course, she wouldn't know who I was. To her, I was just another elderly woman joining a painting class, not the wife of her… What? Lover? Companion? The thought made my stomach clench. Let's start with introductions, Meredith continued. I'm Meredith Parker. I've been painting for over 30 years and teaching for about 15. I believe everyone has creative potential just waiting to be unlocked. She gestured to a woman in the front row to continue the introductions. As it came closer to my turn, I rehearsed my planned response in my head. Just my name, I had decided. Nothing more. But when the moment arrived, something shifted inside me. I'm Margaret Collins, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I've never painted before, but after 60 years of marriage, I decided it was time to try something just for me. A few women nodded approvingly. Meredith smiled. That radiant, engaging smile that I was already coming to resent. That's wonderful. Margaret, it's never too late to discover new passions. The irony of her statement wasn't lost on me. The first lesson was basic, learning about materials, how to stretch paper, the properties of different brushes. Meredith moved around the room as we practiced making simple brush strokes, creating gradients of color from deep blue to pale sky. Lovely control, Margaret, she said when she reached my easel, looking genuinely impressed at my careful gradation. Some people take weeks to get this level of consistency. I've always been good with my hands, I replied, thinking of the thousands of pie crusts I'd carefully rolled out, the endless garments I'd mended, the gardens I'd tended with precision. Just never thought to use them this way. Well, you have a natural touch. I look forward to seeing what you create in this class. As she moved on to the next student, I studied her left hand. No wedding ring, which wasn't surprising. What was surprising was how young her hands looked. Smooth and strong, with only a few age spots to betray her years. My own hands, though steady, mapped a lifetime of work. Veins prominent, knuckles slightly enlarged, skin tissue thin in places. Had Harold noticed her hands? Had he held them and felt the contrast with mine, the hands he'd held for 6 decades? I pushed the thought away and focused on my painting. By the end of the 2-hour class, I had produced a simple but respectable color study. More importantly, I had survived being in the same room as Meredith Parker without either bursting into tears or throwing paint in her face. I considered that a significant victory. As I gathered my supplies, Meredith approached me again. Margaret, I meant what I said earlier. You have a natural eye for this. If you're interested, I also teach a private workshop on Saturdays for more advanced students. You'd be welcome to join even as a beginner. The invitation seemed genuine, her expression open and encouraging. She had no idea who I was. The realization was both a relief and oddly deflating. Thank you, I said carefully, but I'm just getting used to this Thursday commitment. Let me see how I progress. Thursday. I emphasized the word slightly, watching for any reaction. Did she connect Thursdays with Harold? Did she wonder why I'd chosen this particular day for my class? If she noticed anything odd, she didn't show it. Of course. No pressure at all. See you next week, Margaret. I walked to my car on unsteady legs, my canvas tote bag feeling unexpectedly heavy. Only when I was safely inside with the door closed did I allow myself to react, pressing my forehead against the steering wheel and breathing deeply. What was I doing? Was this elaborate charade really my path forward, or just a complicated form of self-torture? But as I started the car and pulled away from the community center, I felt something else beneath the confusion and pain, a small spark of satisfaction. I had taken action. Not the action Harold might have expected, not rage or capitulation, but something entirely my own, and my watercolor gradient had been quite good, actually. Harold had chosen option 2. The morning after I presented him with his choices, He had appeared in the kitchen as I made coffee, his face haggard from what had clearly been a sleepless night. "I'll end it with Meredith," he said without preamble. "I'll do whatever it takes to repair what I've broken, if you'll let me try." I nodded, pouring his coffee the way he liked it, a splash of cream, no sugar. "I need to tell her in person," he added. "I owe her that much." The comment stung. His concern for her feelings in that moment seemed a fresh betrayal, but I recognized it as the right thing to do. Whatever had happened between them, disappearing without explanation would be cruel. "When?" I asked. "Today. This morning." I pushed his coffee across the counter. "Then you should drink this first. You look terrible." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, then vanished. "Margaret, Not now," I interrupted. "Tell her first. End it completely. Then we can talk about what happens next." He nodded, accepting the boundary I'd set. We moved around each other. In careful silence, the familiar morning routine now waited with unspoken pain and uncertainty. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the backyard where generations of our family had gathered for barbecues and birthday parties. I'd planted those hydrangeas when Elizabeth was born. The oak tree had been a sapling when David took his first steps. So much history, so much life. Could we really find a way forward from this betrayal? Harold returned 3 hours later, his expression grim but resolved. "It's done," he said simply. "How did she take it?" I heard myself ask, not sure why I needed to know. He sank into a chair across from me. "With more grace than I deserved. She said she had always known it would end, that a man who truly loved his wife for 60 years wouldn't leave her." He looked down at his hands. "She said she hoped you and I would find our way back to each other." The magnanimity of the statement was infuriating. I didn't want Meredith Parker to be noble or understanding. I wanted her to be a villain I could hate without complication. "That was considerate of her," I managed. "She also said she'll be leaving the community center, taking a position at a senior center across town." This caught me by surprise. "She's quitting her job? Because of this?" Harold nodded. "She said it would be easier for everyone." I felt a confusing tangle of emotions, relief that I wouldn't have to see her at my painting class, guilt that she was upending her life, and a strange sense of loss. I had been prepared to face her weekly, to reclaim that space as my own despite her presence. Now that small act of courage had been rendered unnecessary. "When does she leave?" I asked. "Next week will be her last." I nodded, making a quick decision. "I'm still taking the watercolor class." Harold looked up, surprised. "Even though?" "Yes. That part of what I said doesn't change. I'm still going to develop my own interests. Take that cooking class. Visit Elizabeth." I met his eyes directly. "The betrayal revealed problems that were already there, Harold. We built a life together. But somewhere along the way, I lost pieces of myself. I won't do that anymore." "I understand," he said quietly. The first counseling session was scheduled for the following week. The therapist, Dr. Sharma, was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a direct manner that I appreciated immediately. 60 years is an extraordinary commitment, she observed after we'd explained our situation. "What brought you here today is painful, but the fact that you're both choosing to work through it speaks volumes about the foundation you've built." Harold nodded, glancing at me uncertainly. "I never thought I'd be the kind of man who'd do this. I still can't quite believe I did." "What were you seeking in the relationship with Meredith?" Dr. Sharma asked, her tone neutral, free of judgment. Harold was silent for a long moment. "At first, just conversation. Someone who saw me as, I don't know, not old, not fixed. She talked about art and travel and ideas like they were still possible for people our age." He looked at me apologetically. We'd stopped having those kinds of conversations, Margaret. Somewhere along the way, we started talking only about practical things. Doctor's appointments and grocery lists and the grandchildren. The observation hurt because it contained truth. When had we stopped sharing ideas, dreams, possibilities? And you, Margaret, Dr. Sharma turned to me. What led you to respond the way you did when you discovered the affair? Many people in your position might have simply ended the marriage. I considered the question carefully. 60 years means something, it can't just be erased, no matter what he did. And I realized that part of the problem was me too. I'd become comfortable in routines, in knowing exactly who I was in relation to Harold. His wife, the children's mother, the home manager. I straightened in my chair. I don't want divorce, but I don't want to go back to the marriage we had either. That's a powerful insight, Dr. Sharma said. Often, infidelity is a symptom of underlying issues in a relationship, not simply a moral failing of one partner. That doesn't excuse the behavior, she added, glancing at Harold, but understanding the context can help guide the healing process. We left that first session emotionally drained, but with a fragile sense of purpose. Harold reached for my hand as we walked to the car, the first physical contact we'd shared since I'd confronted him. I allowed it briefly, then gently withdrew. I'm not ready, I said quietly. Not yet. He nodded, accepting the boundary without protest. Another small shift in our dynamic. My needs stated clearly, his acceptance of them. Perhaps this was what growth looked like at our age, painful but necessary, like physical therapy after a joint replacement. My second watercolor class was my last with Meredith Parker. She announced her departure at the beginning of the session, expressing regret, but explaining that an exciting opportunity had arisen at another facility. Cheryl Wilson will be taking over the class next week, she told us. She's a wonderful teacher with a slightly different approach, but I know you'll enjoy working with her. As she moved around the room during our practice time, offering guidance and encouragement, I found myself studying her through new eyes. Not as my husband's mistress, but as a person in her own right. She was patient with struggling students, genuinely enthusiastic about small successes, and clearly passionate about her art. In another life, another circumstance, I might have liked her. At the end of class, as everyone was packing up and offering good wishes for her new position, I lingered deliberately. When the room had emptied except for the two of us, I approached her demonstration table. Meredith, I said, my heart pounding but my voice steady. I wanted to thank you personally for the class. It's opened up something new for me. She looked up from gathering her supplies, her smile warm. Margaret, I'm so glad to hear that. You really do have a natural aptitude for this. I took a deep breath. I also wanted to say that I'm Margaret Collins, Harold's wife. The color drained from her face, her hand freezing in the act of placing brushes in a case. Oh, she said softly. Then, oh God. I'm not here to make a scene, I assured her quickly, or to hurt you. I just needed you to know who I am. She sank slowly onto her stool, her usual vibrancy dimmed by shock. Did Harold? No. He doesn't know I'm taking this class. It was my own decision. She shook her head slightly, as if trying to clear it. I don't understand. Neither do I entirely, I admitted. But when I found out about what happened between you, I realized I'd spent 60 years being defined primarily as Harold's wife. I needed to reclaim something for myself. This class was part of that. Meredith's expression shifted from shock to a complex mixture of guilt, compassion, and something like respect. That's not the response I would have expected. It surprised Harold too, I said with a small, wry smile. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us, filled with all the unspoken realities of our strange connection. He loves you, Meredith finally said. He talked about you all the time, even when we were. She trailed off, mercifully leaving the sentence unfinished. I know, I replied, because I did. Whatever had happened between Harold and this woman, 6 decades of partnership had taught me the fundamental truth of his feelings for me. It was why his betrayal had been so shocking. It seemed to contradict something I had believed unshakable. I'm sorry, she said, meeting my eyes directly. Truly, I never intended. I know that too, I interrupted gently. We rarely intend the pain we cause others. She nodded, accepting the subtle reprimand embedded in my generosity. Your work is quite good, I added, gesturing to a landscape study pinned to the demonstration board. I can see why Harold was drawn to your class. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. He never actually took the class. He would wait in the hallway until it was over, then offer to help me carry my supplies to the car. It was very old-fashioned and charming. The image was so quintessentially Harold, the courtly gestures that had won me over as a young woman, that I felt a fresh stab of pain. Well, I said, gathering my composure, I wish you well in your new position. Margaret? She called as I turned to leave. For what it's worth, I think what you're doing, finding yourself again at our age, is remarkable. Most people just settle into who they've become. The comment struck me as both perceptive and slightly ironic, coming from the woman who had briefly tempted my husband with the illusion of regained youth. It's never too late to discover new passions, I replied, echoing her words from our first class. Isn't that what you said? She acknowledged the pointed response with a small nod. Goodbye, Margaret Collins. I think you might be the strongest woman I've ever met. I left the community center that day feeling strangely unburdened. The confrontation, if our civil exchange could be called that, had provided a kind of closure I hadn't known I needed. Meredith Parker was no longer a shadowy rival, but a flesh-and-blood woman who had made poor choices, but was now removing herself from our lives. And in an odd way, I had her to thank for the awakening I was experiencing. Without the earthquake, of her presence, I might have continued sleepwalking through the final chapter of my life, never questioning the narrowness of the role I'd accepted. When I arrived home, Harold was waiting in the living room, unusually tense. Where have you been? He asked, then immediately held up his hands. I'm sorry. I don't have the right to question you. I was just worried. I had my watercolor class, I said, setting down my tote bag. It ran a little long. His expression shifted to confusion. You still went? Even knowing she would be there? I met his gaze steadily. Yes, and I spoke with her afterward. You what? His face paled. Margaret, what did you... I thanked her for the class and told her who I was. That's all. We had a civil conversation. Harold sank into his armchair, looking stunned. I can't believe you confronted her. It wasn't a confrontation. It was a reclaiming of space that belongs to me too, of dignity. I moved to the window looking out at the garden where spring bulbs were just beginning to emerge. I needed to see her, to understand what drew you to her, and I needed her to see me, not just as an abstract concept, Harold's wife, but as a real person. And, he asked hesitantly, I turned back to face him. And I think we both got what we needed from the exchange. She's moving on. So should we. Harold nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting a mixture of shame, relief, and something that looked like renewed respect. You continue to surprise me, Margaret, after all these years. Good, I said firmly. I plan to keep surprising both of us. The Italian cooking class began the following week, a 6-session course held at the community college on Tuesday evenings. I'd always been a competent cook, assembling the thousands of family meals that form the backbone of domestic life. But rarely had I cooked for the sheer pleasure of it. This class promised to change that. Chef Antonio was a boisterous, silver-haired Italian immigrant who approached food with religious reverence. "Cooking is not about feeding the body," he announced in his melodic accent. "It is about nourishing the soul, about creating memories, about love." The 12 students, a mix of ages and backgrounds, were paired at cooking stations. My partner was James, a recently retired widower in his early 70s, who admitted he'd signed up to learn basic cooking skills after a lifetime of relying on his late wife. "Martha did all the cooking," he explained as we donned aprons and washed our hands. "I can make coffee and toast, but that's about it. My daughter's worried I'm living on frozen dinners and takeout." "Well, I've been cooking for over 60 years, I replied, "but always practical, family meals. Nothing fancy like this." I gestured to Chef Antonio, who was demonstrating the proper way to roll fresh pasta dough. "Sounds like we might balance each other out," James said with a friendly smile. "I'm completely clueless but enthusiastic." The partnership worked surprisingly well. I understood the basic techniques Chef Antonio was teaching, while James approached each task with childlike excitement that made even simple processes feel fresh and interesting. By the end of our first session, we had produced a respectable fettuccine with a classic Bolognese sauce that the chef declared not completely terrible for beginners. "High praise," James laughed as we cleaned our station. "Would you like to take some of this home? My daughter's coming over tomorrow and I'd love to show off, but there's way too much for just me tonight." I hesitated, thinking of Harold waiting at home. Since the revelation of his affair, our mealtimes had been quiet, careful affairs, polite conversation about neutral topics, the weight of counseling sessions, and unanswered questions hovering between us. "Thank you, but I should get back. My husband will be waiting." James nodded without awkwardness. "Of course. See you next week, cooking partner." At home, Harold was setting the table, a task he'd taken on recently without being asked, one of many small efforts to demonstrate his commitment to rebuilding our relationship. "How was the cooking class?" he asked as I hung up my coat. "Interesting, messy, fun." I showed him the container of leftover pasta I'd brought despite my initial hesitation. "I made this." "It looks delicious," he said with genuine appreciation. "Better than the sandwiches I made for dinner." "We can have this instead," I offered, suddenly wanting to share this small new accomplishment with him. As we ate, I found myself describing the class in detail. Chef Antonio's passionate demonstrations, the challenges of making pasta by hand, my cooking partner James, and his determination to learn skills his wife had always handled. "He's a widower," I explained. "Married almost as long as we were. He seems a bit lost without her, but he's trying to adapt." Harold nodded, something complicated passing behind his eyes. "That's how I'd be," he said quietly. "Lost without you. I know I haven't shown it very well lately, but I can't imagine life without you, Margaret." The simple statement, delivered without drama or expectation, touched something in me that elaborate apologies hadn't reached. "The pasta's pretty good," I said after a moment, deflecting from the emotion his words had stirred. "Next week we're learning risotto." Harold accepted the change of subject gracefully. "I've always liked risotto. Maybe you can teach me how to make it sometime." The offer surprised me. In 60 years of marriage, Harold had never shown interest in cooking beyond occasional grilling at summer barbecues. "Maybe I will," I replied, feeling a small opening toward something new between us. That night, for the first time since discovering his betrayal, I didn't retreat to the guest room. I didn't invite intimacy. That would take more time and healing. But I returned to our shared bed, maintaining my separate space but acknowledging our continued connection. Harold said nothing, but I felt his relief as palpable as a change in air pressure. Small steps toward whatever new version of us might emerge from this crucible. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm to our lives. Tuesdays became Italian cooking nights, with Harold expressing genuine interest in the dishes I brought home and eventually joining me in recreating them. Thursdays were my watercolor class, now led by Cheryl Wilson, a former art teacher with a more technical approach than Meredith's intuitive style. Saturdays, we attended counseling with Dr. Sharma, gradually excavating the patterns and assumptions that had calcified in our marriage. "What I'm hearing," Dr. Sharma said during one particularly difficult session, "is that both of you began to take certain things for granted. Harold, you assumed Margaret would always be content in her supporting role without needs of her own beyond the family. And, Margaret, you assumed that fulfilling that role perfectly was enough to ensure Harold's contentment and fidelity." We both nodded, recognizing the truth in her assessment. "The affair was still your choice, Harold," she continued, "and a destructive one. But the conditions that made it possible were created by both of you over many years. It was a hard truth to accept, that I had played a part in the stagnation of our marriage, that my own surrender of identity had contributed to the distance between us. Not that it justified Harold's actions, but it helped explain them. I never wanted to be a burden," I admitted. "My mother always told me that a good wife makes life easier for her husband, not harder. So I handled everything I could on my own. The house, the children, the social calendar, even my own feelings. I thought that's what love meant." Harold reached for my hand, his eyes damp. "And I let you do it. I accepted all you gave without questioning what it cost you, without making sure you had space for your own dreams. They were important realizations, but translating them into a new way of being together after 6 decades of established patterns wasn't simple. We stumbled often, Harold sometimes reverting to old expectations, me falling back into familiar self-effacement. But we kept trying, kept talking, kept showing up to the difficult work of reinvention. In late spring, about 3 months after discovering Harold's affair, I completed my first significant watercolor painting. A study of the hydrangeas in our backyard, their blue and purple blooms captured with surprising accuracy. Cheryl had praised it highly and suggested I consider entering it in the community art show planned for the summer. "It's really quite good, Margaret," she insisted. "You have a genuine talent for capturing light and texture." I brought the painting home, both proud and slightly embarrassed by my pride. Harold was in the backyard when I arrived, pruning the rose bushes that had needed attention for months. "I have something to show you," I called through the open kitchen window. He came inside, wiping his hands on his gardening pants, and stopped, short when I unveiled the painting on the dining room table. "Margaret," he said softly, "did you do this? It's beautiful." "It's just a study," I demurred, the old habit of minimizing my accomplishments surfacing automatically. Then, catching myself, I added, "But yes, I'm quite pleased with how it turned." "Out! Cheryl thinks I should enter it in the community art show." "You absolutely should," Harold agreed, leaning closer to examine the details. "You've captured the exact blue of those hydrangeas, the ones we planted when Elizabeth was born." The fact that he remembered the significance of those particular flowers touched me unexpectedly. Despite everything, despite the pain and betrayal, we shared a history that no one else could fully understand. The accumulated memories and meanings of a lifetime together. "I've been thinking," Harold said as he straightened up, "about what Dr. Sharma said about each of us having dreams we've set aside. Do you remember how we used to talk about traveling after we retired? Not just to visit the kids, but to see places we've always wanted to experience?" I nodded. Early, in our marriage, we'd often discussed ambitious travel plans for our golden years: Italy, France, Greece. But when retirement actually arrived, we'd settled into comfortable routines, venturing only as far as our children's homes and the occasional cruise with friends. "I found some information about a 2-week art and cooking tour in Tuscany," he continued. "Small groups, staying in a converted farmhouse with daily painting excursions and cooking lessons using local ingredients. It made me think of your watercolors and those Italian dishes you've been making." I stared at him, genuinely surprised. You've been researching trips to Italy? He nodded, a hint of his old boyish enthusiasm lighting his face. Just preliminarily, to see what might be possible. For us, I mean, if you were interested. The gesture represented something significant, not just an appreciation of my new interests, but an invitation to build new experiences together, to create a different kind of partnership than the one we'd settled into over decades. I'd want to hear more about it, I said cautiously. The details, the cost, the physical requirements. Of course, it's just an idea at this point. He hesitated, then added, but I thought it might be good for us to have something to look forward to, something new we could experience together. I studied my husband, the familiar lines of his face now etched deeper with age and recent strain, the hopeful uncertainty in his eyes, the dirt from the garden still under his fingernails. For 60 years, I had loved this man. Through the eye, birth of our children, the deaths of our parents, financial struggles and successes, health scares and recoveries. The pain of his betrayal hadn't erased that love, though it had transformed it, forcing it to become more clear-eyed, less idealized. Italy would be nice, I said finally. I've always wanted to see the art in Florence. His smile, relieved, grateful, genuinely happy, reminded me of the young man who had proposed to me on a rainy afternoon in 1962, offering a modest ring and promises of a life filled with love and partnership. Some of those promises had been broken, but perhaps others could still be kept, or even reimagined for the final chapters of our shared story. My solo trip to visit Elizabeth in Chicago came next, 5 days away from Harold, my first independent travel since before our marriage. My daughter was surprised by the arrangement, but supportive after I explained the situation. I can't believe Dad did that, she said when I called to tell her about the affair and our efforts to rebuild. After 60 years, with a watercolor teacher. It happened, I said simply. Now we're trying to find a way forward that's honest. Part of that is me developing interests and independence I've neglected. Good for you, Mom, she said with feeling. It's about time. You've always been all about Dad and us kids. You deserve to think about yourself for once. The validation from my adult daughter, permission to prioritize myself after decades of putting family first, was unexpectedly emotional. I'll still be coming to visit, I assured her. But just me this time. Is that all right? Are you kidding? We'll have a girls' week. I'll take time off work. We can do museums, shopping, whatever you want. The visit proved transformative. Elizabeth and I had always been close, but our relationship had centered primarily around her life. Her career as a hospital administrator, her marriage, her children. Now, for the first time, she showed genuine curiosity about me as an individual. I realized I don't really know what you like, Mom, she admitted as we browsed in an art supply store, where I was selecting better quality watercolor materials than my beginner set. I mean, besides taking care of everyone else, what are your favorite books, movies? Do you like symphonies or theater or baseball games? I've never thought to ask. The question gave me pause. What did I like, separate from what Harold enjoyed or what benefited our family? I've always loved historical fiction, I said after a moment's reflection. And botanical gardens. I played tennis in college before I met your father. I've always wanted to learn to play the piano. Elizabeth shook her head, looking slightly ashamed. How did I not know any of this? You've known everything about my life forever. That's what mothers do, I said with a small smile. Or at least, that's what I thought they should do. I'm learning there might be other ways to approach it. During my Chicago visit, Elizabeth took me to the Art Institute, where I found myself deeply moved by the watercolor and tempera studies in the American Modernist collection. We attended a piano recital at a small venue near her home, which inspired me to inquire about adult piano lessons when I returned. We spent an afternoon at the Chicago Botanic Garden, where I filled pages in my sketchbook with plant studies. that Cheryl had encouraged me to practice. On my last evening, as we shared a bottle of wine in Elizabeth's kitchen after her husband had gone to bed, she asked the question I'd been dreading. "Are you going to stay with Dad, after what he did?" I considered my answer carefully. I'm choosing to rebuild something with him. Not the same marriage we had, that's gone. But something new that might actually be better in some ways. More honest. More equal. She nodded slowly. "You don't seem as angry as I would be." "Oh, I was angry," I assured her. Furious. Devastated. But beneath that, I recognized something important. That the marriage that led to his affair wasn't making either of us truly happy. We'd fallen into roles that were suffocating both of us in different ways. "That still doesn't excuse cheating," Elizabeth protested. "No, it doesn't. And Harold knows that. He's doing the work to understand why he made that choice and to rebuild trust." I took a sip of wine, gathering my thoughts. But I'm also doing work to understand my part in our dysfunction. Not the affair, that was his choice alone, but the patterns that left us vulnerable to it. Elizabeth studied me with new eyes. "You've changed, Mom. I don't think I've ever heard you talk about Dad as anything less than perfect before." I laughed softly. "No one's perfect, especially not after 60 years of marriage. I just chose not to see the flaws because that made my role simpler. Being the perfect wife to a perfect husband was easier than navigating the complexity of a real relationship between two flawed people. And now? Now I'm trying to be real. To see Harold clearly, with all his strengths and weaknesses. To let him see me the same way. It's harder, but it feels more authentic than what we had before." Elizabeth reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you, Mom. Whatever you decide, whether you stay with Dad forever or eventually choose a different path, I just want you to be happy. Really happy, not just going through the motions." "That's what I want too," I replied. "For both of us." When I returned home from Chicago, carrying new art supplies, books on Italian gardens, and a renewed sense of self, I found the house transformed. Harold had clearly spent the 5 days of my absence in a flurry of activity. The living room had been rearranged to create a bright corner near the best window, where an easel now stood with a small table for art supplies. In the rarely used formal dining room, a digital keyboard had been set up with a beginner's piano instruction book open on the stand. "I might have gone overboard," Harold admitted sheepishly as he helped bring my bags in from the taxi. "But I wanted you to have proper spaces for your new interests." I walked slowly through the rooms, touching the easel, the piano keys. "You did all this yourself?" He nodded. "David came over to help move the heavier furniture. He knows about everything. I hope that's okay. I needed to talk to someone while you were gone and he called to check on me." The fact that Harold had confided in our son, had shown vulnerability instead of maintaining the stoic facade he'd presented throughout our marriage, was yet another small but significant change. "It's fine," I assured him. "Elizabeth knows too. It would have been strange not to explain why I was visiting alone." He nodded, accepting this new reality where our private struggles were no longer quite so private. "How was your trip?" "Wonderful. Eye-opening." I sat down at the kitchen table, suddenly tired from travel but energized by the experiences I'd had. I learned things about myself I'd forgotten or never fully acknowledged. And about Elizabeth, too. We connected differently when it was just the two of us. Harold sat across from me, his expression thoughtful. "I realized something while you were gone. I've never really been alone. I went from my parents' home to college, had roommates, then married you. These 5 days were the first time in my 82 years that I've been truly on my own." The observation startled me. I'd never considered that Harold, for all his professional confidence and social ease, had never experienced solitude, the way I had during my Chicago trip. Even my brief absence had pushed him into unfamiliar emotional territory. "How was it?" I asked. Being alone? He considered the question seriously. Difficult at first. Too quiet. I talked to the television just to hear a voice. A self-deprecating smile crossed his face. But then, illuminating. I had to figure out what I actually wanted to do each day, not just follow our usual routines or defer to your preferences. I read that mystery novel that's been sitting on my nightstand for months, watch documentaries about quantum physics at 2 in the morning, called David just to talk, not because we needed to discuss something specific. Sounds like you had your own journey of self-discovery, I observed. On a much smaller scale than yours, he acknowledged. But yes, I realized how much I've defined myself in relation to others. Son, husband, father, colleague. Without anyone else present, I had to confront the question of who Harold Collins actually is. And who is he? Harold's expression turned wistful. Still figuring that out. But I know he loves art and science and history. He makes terrible scrambled eggs but decent pancakes. He misses playing chess, but not for the reasons he thought. He reached across the table, not quite touching my hand, but close. And he loves his wife. Not just as a role or a habit, but as a person he's finally learning to truly see. The sincerity in his voice moved me, but I maintained the careful, emotional distance that had become our new normal. I brought you something from Chicago, I said, reaching into my tote bag. I withdrew a small, elegantly bound book. It's a collection of essays about Renaissance art. I thought you might enjoy it, given your interest in art appreciation. The reference to his connection with Meredith wasn't lost on Harold, but rather than flinching from it, he accepted both, the book and the subtle acknowledgement of our painful history. Thank you. I'd like to learn more about what draws you to painting, to understand what you see when you look at art. It was a small moment, but representative of our evolving dynamic, the willingness to acknowledge the fractures in our relationship while building new connections across them. That night, I played a simple, one-handed melody on the keyboard, the tentative notes of Greensleeves filling our home with something new and entirely mine. From the kitchen, where he was preparing a simple dinner, Harold called, "Beautiful, Margaret. Keep playing." I did, fumbling through the basic arrangement in the beginner's book, making frequent mistakes, but continuing nonetheless. The process felt like a metaphor for this late-life reinvention, imperfect, challenging, but surprisingly satisfying. Summer brought new developments. My hydrangea painting was accepted into the community art show, where it received an honorable mention in the beginners category. Harold attended the opening reception with me, proudly engaging with other artists and visitors about my wife's remarkable talent. "You don't need to oversell it," I murmured, as he enthusiastically explained my painting technique to a bemused gallery volunteer. "I'm not," he countered. "Cheryl told me your progress has been exceptional. I'm just stating facts." The pride in his voice was genuine, without the subtle, patronizing tone that had sometimes colored his support of my domestic accomplishments over the decades. This was different, respect for something I was achieving entirely on my own merit. The Italian cooking class concluded with a final dinner where each pair prepared a full regional menu for the group to share. James and I tackled a Sicilian feast, arancini, pasta alla norma, and cannoli that Chef Antonio declared almost authentically Sicilian, which is a miracle for Americans. "We make a good team," James observed as we received compliments from our classmates. "You should be proud of how far you've come with these techniques." "And you as well," I replied sincerely. "Martha would be impressed with your progress." He smiled, a touch of sadness softening his expression. "I think she'd be surprised more than anything. I never showed much interest when she was alive. One of many regrets." The comment resonated with my own journey, the belated discovery of interests and capabilities after decades of narrowly defined roles. We can only move forward, I suppose. Learn from the past without being trapped by it. James nodded thoughtfully. Philosophical as well as an excellent cook. Your husband is a fortunate man. The statement, devoid of flirtation but warm with genuine appreciation, gave me a small glow of pride. I hadn't been seen this way, as an individual worthy of admiration apart from my family role, in longer than I could remember. Harold had come to pick me up, arriving just as the dinner was concluding. He greeted James cordially when I introduced them, the two men exchanging pleasantries without awkwardness. "Your wife has taught me more than Chef Antonio," James told Harold with good-humored honesty. "She has the patience of a saint." "She does indeed," Harold agreed, glancing at me with a mixture of affection and regret that suggested he wasn't just talking about cooking lessons. As we drove home, Harold asked thoughtful questions about the dishes we'd prepared and techniques I'd learned. The conversation flowed easily, without the strain that had characterized our interactions in the early aftermath of his affair. "I've been thinking about that Italy trip," he said as we neared home. "The art and cooking tour. If you're still interested, we could look at options for the fall. The weather would be pleasant and the crowds smaller than summer." The suggestion pleased me more than I expected. Despite the progress in my independent activities, the prospect of sharing a new experience with Harold still held appeal. 60 years of shared history couldn't simply be erased or ignored. It formed the foundation upon which any new relationship between us would be built. "I'd like that," I said. "Let's look at the details together." His smile, relieved, grateful, reminded me that despite our painful recent history, there remained between us a connection worth preserving, worth reimagining for whatever time we had left. The counseling sessions with Dr. Sharma continued through summer and into early fall, though with decreasing frequency as we developed better communication patterns and a clearer understanding of our new relationship dynamics. "I'm seeing significant progress," Dr. Sharma observed during a session in September. "You're both demonstrating greater awareness of patterns that contributed to your difficulties, and you're implementing concrete changes to address them." Harold nodded. "It's still work every day, catching myself when I fall back into old expectations or assumptions." "For me too," I added. "I still have to remind myself to express preferences, to claim space for my own interests without guilt." Dr. Sharma smiled. "These are lifelong habits you're working to change. It's natural that the process isn't linear or immediate. What matters is the consistent effort and mutual support I'm observing." The mutual support part was particularly meaningful. In recent months, Harold and I had developed a different kind of partnership, one where we actively encouraged each other's individual growth while maintaining our connection. Harold had joined a science discussion group at the library, rekindling his long-dormant interest in physics and astronomy. I had progressed to intermediate watercolor classes and started piano lessons with a retired music teacher from the community college. We still had difficult moments. Sometimes a casual comment would trigger memories of the affair, sending me into a brief but intense period of renewed grief and anger. Harold would occasionally express subtle insecurity about my growing independence, fearing it might lead me away from him entirely. But we had developed tools to navigate these challenges: honest conversation, respected boundaries, and the shared commitment to building something new from the fragments of what had been broken. "I think we can transition to monthly check-ins," Dr. Sharma suggested, "with the understanding that you can schedule additional sessions if specific issues arise that you're struggling to resolve." As we left her office, Harold reached for my hand, a gesture that had once been automatic but now carried deliberate meaning. I accepted it, our fingers interlacing with familiar ease. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" he asked as we walked to the car, autumn leaves crunching beneath our feet. I considered the question carefully. "Yes," I said finally. "Not the same as before, but okay in a new way, maybe even better in some ways." He nodded, squeezing my hand gently. "I'll take that." The Italy trip was scheduled for mid-October, 2 weeks in Tuscany with a small group of like-minded travelers interested in art and cuisine. The tour company specialized in accommodating senior travelers, with a relaxed pace and considerations for varying mobility levels. As our departure approached, I found myself experiencing both excitement and trepidation. We hadn't traveled internationally together since a cruise for our 50th anniversary a decade earlier. This would be different, more active, more engaging, and taking place within the context of our still healing relationship. What if we get there and realize we don't enjoy traveling together anymore? I confessed to Elizabeth during one of our now regular phone calls. What if being together 24/7 in a foreign country reveals that we've changed too much to connect that way? Then you'll come home with beautiful paintings of Tuscany and knowledge of authentic Italian cooking, she replied practically. Nothing ventured, nothing gained, Mom. Isn't that what you've been learning this past year? She was right, of course. The biggest changes in my life had come from being willing to step into uncertainty, taking that first watercolor class, confronting Meredith, traveling to Chicago alone. This trip with Harold represented another step into the unknown, another opportunity to discover who we could be together in this new chapter. The evening before our departure, James from cooking class called to wish us a good journey. We'd maintained a casual friendship since the course ended, occasionally meeting for coffee or attending local food festivals together. Bring back plenty of new recipes to share, he urged. And remember what Chef Antonio always said about trusting your palate over the recipe. I will, I promised. And you remember to make those cannoli for your daughter's birthday. She'll be impressed. After I hung up, I noticed Harold watching me with a thoughtful expression. What? I asked, suddenly self-conscious. Nothing, he said. Just, I like seeing you have friendships of your own. Connections that aren't tied to me or our history together. It suits you. The observation surprised me. Early in our marriage, Harold had sometimes displayed subtle jealousy of my close friendships, preferring that our social circle revolve primarily around his work colleagues and their wives. This new appreciation for my independent relationships marked yet another evolution in our dynamic. James has been a good friend, I said simply. He understands what it's like to rediscover yourself late in life. His wife did everything for him, and now he's learning to be self-sufficient. Harold nodded, a flicker of recognition crossing his features. I understand that better now. How easy it is to let someone else handle the emotional and practical aspects of life until suddenly they can't, or won't, anymore. You were never as helpless as James, I clarified. But yes, we fell into roles that weren't entirely healthy for either of us. Well, Harold said, moving to place his empty teacup in the dishwasher, another small habit he'd developed over recent months. I'm grateful for James's friendship with you, and for all the ways you're flourishing now. It was perhaps the most profound acknowledgement yet of our transformed relationship, Harold's genuine appreciation for aspects of my life that existed separate from him, that didn't directly serve his needs or comfort. Thank you, I said simply. That means a great deal. Tuscany in October was everything the travel brochures had promised. Rolling hills covered with vineyards in autumn colors, ancient stone villages bathed in golden light, air scented with rosemary and wood smoke. Our accommodations, a restored farmhouse outside Siena, provided the perfect base for daily excursions to painting locations and cooking lessons with local chefs. The small tour group, 6 couples and 3 solo, travelers all over 60, quickly developed an easy camaraderie. Harold and I found ourselves particularly drawn to a couple from Toronto, Judith and Michael, who had been married for 55 years and shared our interest in art and history. We reinvented our marriage after retirement, Judith confided, over dinner one evening. Michael was a surgeon, brilliant but completely absorbed in his work. I raised our children and managed everything else. When he retired, we had to learn how to actually be together, how to share space and time in meaningful ways. That sounds familiar, I replied, glancing at Harold, who was deep in conversation with Michael about Renaissance architecture. How did you manage the transition? Judith smiled, watching her husband with a blend of exasperation and affection. Not easily. There were moments I considered murdering him for rearranging my kitchen cabinets or suggesting improvements to systems that had worked perfectly for decades. She laughed softly. But we found new common interests: travel, gardening, our grandchildren. And we gave each other space for individual pursuits. Michael volunteers at a medical clinic for refugees. I teach English to immigrant women. We come together and move apart in a different rhythm than before. Her description resonated with the new balance Harold and I were establishing. More fluid, more conscious than the rigid roles we'd maintained for decades. Each day in Tuscany brought new discoveries, both of the breathtaking landscape and of each other. During morning painting sessions in vineyards or olive groves, I found myself absorbing techniques from our art instructor with an enthusiasm that reminded me of my college days before marriage and motherhood had narrowed my focus. Harold would often sit nearby, reading or sketching simple outlines in a notebook he'd purchased in a Siena stationery shop, occasionally asking questions about what I was learning. Afternoons were devoted to cooking lessons in the farmhouse's spacious kitchen, where we worked together crushing tomatoes for panzanella, rolling pasta for ravioli, or stirring risotto with patience and precision. Harold proved surprisingly adept at these culinary tasks, his engineer's mind appreciating the technical aspects of cooking. "You've been holding out on me," I teased as he perfectly executed a difficult folding technique for tortellini. All these years I could have had help in the kitchen. I didn't know I could do this, he admitted. It never occurred to me to try. In the evenings, our tour group would gather for long, leisurely dinners featuring the dishes we'd prepared, accompanied by local wines and spirited conversation that often continued until late in the night. Harold and I would then walk back to our room beneath star-filled skies, sometimes talking, sometimes silent, but companionably so. On our 10th night in Tuscany, as we strolled back from dinner through the farmhouse's lavender-lined path, Harold stopped suddenly and turned to me. "I need to say something," he began, his voice serious in the darkness. "Something I've been thinking about since we arrived here." A flutter of anxiety stirred in my chest, old insecurities rising despite our months of healing work. "What is it?" He took both my hands in his, visible in the soft glow from the garden lights. "I've been happier these past 10 days than I can remember being in years. Not because Italy is beautiful, though it is, but because of how we are together here. How we're experiencing everything with fresh eyes, both the place and each other." I nodded, having felt the same surprising contentment. "It's been wonderful. I want to apologize again," he continued. "Not just for the affair, which was unforgivable, but for the years before that when I took you for granted. When I stopped seeing you clearly. When I accepted all you gave without ensuring you had space for your own joy." The sincerity in his voice touched me deeply. We'd discussed these issues in counseling, but something about this moment, standing beneath Italian stars in a garden thousands of miles from our familiar patterns, gave his words new weight. "I've been thinking about what Judith said about rhythms," I replied. "How marriage changes over time, how we need to adjust the balance of togetherness and independence. I think that's what was missing for us. We became fixed in patterns that stopped serving either of us well." Harold nodded, squeezing my hands gently. "I'm grateful for this second chance. To know you differently. To be known differently, too." In that moment, surrounded by the scent of lavender and the chirping of Italian crickets, I felt something shift inside me. The final piece of genuine forgiveness sliding into place. Not forgetting, not excusing, but truly moving forward, carrying the lessons of our painful chapter without being defined by them. "I'm grateful too," I said softly, stepping closer to him. for everything that brought us here, even the hardest parts. When he kissed me then, it wasn't with the habitual affection of a 60-year marriage, but with a tenderness that acknowledged both our history and the new territory we were creating together. For the first time since discovering his betrayal, I allowed myself to fully reconnect with him, not just emotionally, but physically as well. That night in our Tuscan farmhouse room, with the windows open to the October breeze, Harold and I rediscovered each other with the gentle passion of those who understand that love at 80 is different from love at 20. More patient, more knowing, tempered by an awareness of life's fragility and preciousness. "I love you, Margaret," Harold whispered as we lay together afterward, "not as a habit or an obligation, but as the remarkable woman you are, the one you've always been. Beneath the roles you played, the one you're revealing more fully now." "I love you too," I replied, the words carrying new meaning after all we'd been through. The real you, flawed and struggling sometimes, but trying. Always trying. We fell asleep holding hands, as we had on so many nights over 60 years, but with a different quality to our connection, one forged through fire, tested by betrayal, and emerging stronger for having been broken and deliberately, consciously mended. Neat, our return home from Italy brought the challenge of maintaining our newfound balance within the context of familiar surroundings and established patterns. The temptation to slip back into old habits was strong, particularly as daily life reasserted its mundane rhythms. "We need to be intentional," Harold observed as we unpacked our suitcases, "about preserving what we discovered in Italy, about making space for both connection and independence." I agreed, recognizing the wisdom in his concern. What if we established some new routines? Protected time for both shared activities and individual pursuits. The system we developed over the following weeks represented a fundamental restructuring of our daily lives. Mornings remained largely shared time, breakfast together, discussing plans for the day, occasionally working together on household tasks. Afternoons were designated for individual activities, my painting or piano practice, Harold's science, reading or woodworking projects he had recently begun in the garage. Evenings brought us back together for dinner, which we now prepared collaboratively more often than not, implementing techniques from our Tuscan cooking lessons. We established a weekly date night where we would try new restaurants or attend concerts or lectures, making deliberate efforts to engage with each other beyond domestic convenience. More significant than these schedule adjustments was the underlying shift in how we related to each other, the genuine curiosity about each other's thoughts and experiences, the respect for separate interests, the conscious choice to turn toward, rather than away from each other during moments of disconnection. "You seem different since Italy," Elizabeth observed when she and her family visited for Thanksgiving. "Both of you. More, I don't know, present? Engaged?" "We are different," I confirmed, watching through the kitchen window as Harold played an improvised lawn game with our grandchildren despite the November chill. "We're more fully ourselves, individually and together." "I never thought Dad would change at his age," she mused. "I always figured people just get more set in their ways as they get older." I smiled, thinking of all the transformations the past year had brought. "I think that's a choice we make, not an inevitability. We can choose growth at any age. It's just harder when you've had decades of practice being a certain way." "Well, whatever you're doing, it's working." "I haven't seen you this happy in years, Mom." Her observation gave me pause. Was I happy? Not in the uncomplicated way I might have been before discovering Harold's affair. That innocent trust was gone forever, but in its place had grown something, perhaps more valuable. A deeper, more conscious contentment based on genuine understanding rather than comfortable illusion. "I am happy," I realized aloud. Not perfectly or constantly, but genuinely. And on my own terms, not just as a reflection of everyone else's happiness. Elizabeth squeezed my hand. That's all I've ever wanted for you. As winter settled over our neighborhood, bringing short days and long evenings by the fireplace, Harold and I continued to nurture both our reconnection and our individual growth. My watercolor skills progressed to the point where Cheryl suggested I consider offering beginners workshops at the community center. Harold joined a volunteer program teaching basic computer skills to seniors at the local library, finding unexpected satisfaction in helping contemporaries navigate technology. We still attended monthly check-ins with Dr. Sharma, using these sessions to address small issues before they could develop into larger problems. The affair was less frequently the direct topic of discussion, though its shadow remained. A painful chapter in our history that had catalyzed necessary change. "I've been thinking about forgiveness," I said during one December session. "Not just forgiving Harold, which has been a process rather than a single decision, but forgiving myself, too." "For what do you feel you need forgiveness, Dr. Sharma asked. I considered the question carefully. For the roles I played in our dysfunction. For surrendering my identity so completely to being a wife and mother that I became almost invisible, even to myself. For establishing patterns that ultimately contributed to our problems. Harold reached for my hand. "You shouldn't have to forgive yourself for those things, Margaret. They were adaptations to expectations placed on women of your generation, on wives and mothers specifically." "Perhaps," I acknowledged, "but I made choices too. Even within those expectations, I could have maintained more of myself, could have insisted on more balance. I need to forgive myself for not doing that earlier, for waiting until a crisis forced me to change." Dr. Sharma nodded thoughtfully. "Self-forgiveness is indeed an important part of healing. Not to assume inappropriate blame, but to release the regret that keeps us tethered to past versions of ourselves." "I think that's it exactly," I agreed. "I need to forgive the Margaret who believed her value lay solely in serving others, who thought sacrificing her own identity was a form of love rather than a slow form of self-erasure." Harold's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I wish I had seen it sooner, had encouraged you to hold on to more of yourself through all those years." "We both did the best we could with the understanding we had at the time," I replied, echoing a phrase Dr. Sharma had offered in an earlier session. "Now we know better, so we can do better." As Christmas approached, bringing with it the familiar rhythms of family gatherings and holiday traditions, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary year that had passed since I discovered Harold's betrayal. The pain of that discovery remained real, but no longer dominated my emotional landscape. Like a scar from a serious injury, it had healed into something I could touch without flinching, a permanent mark that had changed me but no longer defined me. David and his family joined us for Christmas Eve, bringing their annual contribution of chaotic energy and genuine warmth to our home. As I watched Harold help our youngest grandchild, 7-year-old Emma, arrange cookies on a plate for Santa, I felt a complex wave of emotion: gratitude for the family we had built together, sadness for the difficult path we had traveled this year, and cautious hope for the future we were creating. Later that evening, after David's family had departed for their hotel and the house settled into rare quiet, Harold and I sat beside the Christmas tree with glasses of sherry, a holiday tradition dating back to our first married Christmas in 1962. "I have something for you," Harold said, retrieving a small package from beneath the tree. "Not your main gift, that's for tomorrow with everyone, but something just for tonight, just for us." I unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a small velvet box. Inside lay a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a paintbrush crossed, with a piano key. "It's beautiful," I said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness of the design. "I had it custom made," Harold explained, "to celebrate your new passions, and to remind both of us that it's never too late to discover new dimensions of yourself." I fastened the necklace, the pendant resting just below my collarbone. "I have something for you too," I said, retrieving My own small package from where I'd hidden it in the bookshelf. Harold opened it to find a handsome leather-bound journal. For your thoughts on science and all those other subjects you're exploring, I explained. I've noticed you making notes on scraps of paper. I thought you might enjoy having a proper place to develop your ideas. He ran his hand over the supple cover, clearly pleased. Thank you for seeing what matters to me now, not just what mattered to me before. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the lights twinkle on the tree, before Harold spoke again. I've been thinking about next year, he said. About where we go from here. Oh? And where is that? I asked, curious about his reflections. Wherever we choose, I suppose. That's what I've realized. We get to decide, together and separately, how we want to spend however many years we have left. He turned to face me more directly. The Italy trip organizers sent information about a similar program in Greece next fall. Would that interest you? The invitation represented more than just a travel opportunity. It was a statement of continued commitment to our shared future, to building new experiences together despite the pain of the past year. I'd like that, I said. And perhaps in the spring, we could visit David in Boston. I've been corresponding with a watercolor artist there whose work I admire. She offers workshops I'd love to attend. Harold nodded encouragingly. We could make it a dual-purpose trip, together and separate, like we've been discussing. As midnight approached, bringing Christmas Day and the gathering of our extended family later that morning, I found myself filled with a sense of possibility that had been absent for longer than I could remember. The paths stretching before us were not the ones I had envisioned when we celebrated our 60th anniversary the previous year, but they held their own promise, perhaps even greater promise for being chosen with clear eyes and hard-won wisdom. Merry Christmas, Harold, I said as the grandfather clock in the hallway began to chime 12. Merry Christmas, Margaret, he replied, reaching for my hand. Thank you for this second chance, for this new beginning. It's not what either of us expected at this stage of life, I observed, starting over in so many ways. No, he agreed. But maybe that's the greatest gift of all. The discovery that we can still surprise each other and ourselves after all these years. As snow began to fall outside our window, soft flakes illuminated by the colored lights of the Christmas tree, I leaned against Harold's shoulder, neither forgetting the pain he had caused, nor allowing it to determine our future. We had weathered the greatest crisis of our 60-year marriage and emerged not unchanged. That would have been impossible, but perhaps stronger for having been broken and deliberately, consciously rebuilt. What he hadn't expected when he cheated on me after 60 years of marriage was my response. Not blind forgiveness or bitter rejection, but a courageous reclaiming of myself that would ultimately offer us both a more authentic way of loving each other for whatever time remained. The new year brought continued evolution in both our individual pursuits and our relationship. January found me teaching my first beginner's watercolor workshop at the community center, nervously guiding 8 students through basic techniques I had only mastered myself the previous year. You were a natural teacher, Harold observed when I returned home, exhilarated and exhausted in equal measure. You've always had a gift for explaining things clearly. It was terrifying, I admitted, but wonderful too. Seeing their excitement when a technique worked, helping them past frustration when it didn't. Will you do it again? I nodded, already planning improvements for the next session. Monthly, if there's enough interest. The center director seemed pleased with the enrollment numbers. Harold's volunteer work at the library expanded to include one-on-one technology sessions with seniors who needed additional support. He came home with stories of helping 85-year-old Esther master video calls with her great-grandchildren in Australia, or teaching 78-year-old Walter how to research his family genealogy online. Most of them just need patience, and someone who doesn't make them feel stupid for not understanding, he explained. Once they get past the fear of breaking something, They learn surprisingly quickly. I recognized in his description the same approach Cheryl had taken with my early watercolor efforts. Patience, encouragement, breaking complex skills into manageable steps. Harold had discovered a talent for teaching that had gone untapped throughout his engineering career, where he had been valued more for technical knowledge than interpersonal skills. February brought a significant milestone, a special exhibit at the community center featuring works by local senior artists, including 3 of my watercolor paintings. The opening reception coincided with our 61st wedding anniversary, creating a poignant symmetry with the previous year's devastating dinner at Le Jardin. "Are you sure you want to have the reception on our anniversary?" Harold asked when I first mentioned the date. "We could celebrate privately the day before or after." "I'm sure," I said firmly. "I want to replace last year's anniversary memory with something better. Something that celebrates who we are now, not who we were then." The reception was a modest affair by most standards. Refreshments in the community center's gallery space, a small crowd of local art enthusiasts and supportive friends. But to me, it represented a profound transformation from the woman who had sat across from Harold a year earlier, believing her life was proceeding exactly as planned until the moment it shattered. James attended, bringing a bouquet of yellow tulips to match the light in your landscape study, he explained. Cheryl proudly introduced me to several Arts Council members as a remarkable emerging talent. My children and their spouses made surprise appearances, having coordinated with Harold to be present for this important evening. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," David said, examining my paintings with genuine appreciation. "These are really good. Not just good for someone who started last year, but actually good." "Thank you," I replied, accepting the compliment without deflection. Another small but significant change in how I moved through the world. I've discovered I love the process almost more than the results. The focus it requires, the wait time, disappears when I'm working. As the evening progressed, Harold stayed close by my side but never overshadowed me, offering support while allowing me to be the focus of well-deserved attention. When someone asked how long I'd been painting, he smiled and said simply, "Margaret has always been artistic. I'm just glad everyone else gets to see that now, too." After the reception, we declined our children's invitation to join them for dinner, choosing instead to return home for a quiet celebration of our own. 61 years, Harold mused as we settled in our living room with glasses of champagne. This wasn't the anniversary either of us envisioned a year ago. "No," I agreed. "You were planning to end our marriage, and I was oblivious to that fact." He winced slightly at my directness, but nodded. "I was making the biggest mistake of my life and didn't even realize it. I'm grateful every day that you found a different path forward than the obvious one." I sipped my champagne, considering his words. "I'm not sure I deserve that much credit. I didn't choose reconciliation immediately or easily. I was furious, devastated. But somewhere beneath that, I recognized that throwing away 60 years together wasn't the answer either." "Most people would have," Harold said, "and no one would have blamed you." "Perhaps. But I would have lost something precious along with the painful parts." I set down my glass and turned to face him fully. "This year has been the hardest of my life in many ways, but also the most transformative. I've discovered strengths I didn't know I had, interests I'd neglected, dimensions of myself beyond being your wife. And I've discovered what a fool I was to take any of that for granted," Harold replied, his voice thick with emotion. "To not see how extraordinary you are, Margaret. How lucky I've been to share my life with you." I reached for his hand, the gesture now deliberate rather than habitual. "We're different people than we were a year ago, both of us. And I think our marriage is better for it, despite the painful path that brought us here." As we toasted our 61st anniversary, a milestone I had once taken for granted, but now recognized as both an achievement and a choice, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year. From the devastation of betrayal to the gradual, deliberate reconstruction of a relationship worth saving. From the comfortable but constraining roles we had inhabited for decades to the more authentic, balanced partnership we were creating now. What my husband hadn't expected when he cheated on me after 60 years of marriage was that his betrayal would ultimately lead us both toward greater honesty, deeper connection, and more genuine appreciation for each other than we had experienced in decades. Not despite the pain, but because of how we had chosen to move through it. Together, yet more fully ourselves than ever before. Spring brought new energy and continued growth, both literally in my garden and figuratively in our evolving lives. My monthly watercolor workshops at the community center had developed a loyal following, with some students returning for each new session. Harold's technology coaching had expanded to include a weekly Digital Skills for Seniors group class that regularly filled to capacity. We maintained our balance of separate and shared activities, my painting and piano lessons, his volunteer work and science discussions, our collaborative cooking adventures and evening walks through the neighborhood as winter released its grip. The rhythm we had established felt natural now, no longer requiring conscious effort to maintain. In April, we made the Boston trip we had discussed, staying with David and his family while pursuing both joint and individual interests. While Harold attended a lecture series on astronomy at the Museum of Science, I participated in the watercolor workshop I had been anticipating for months. "You've developed a distinctive style," the instructor observed during our third session. "There's a clarity and precision to your work, but also an emotional quality, particularly in how you handle light. Have you considered submitting to juried exhibitions?" The suggestion took me by surprise. "I've only been painting for a little over a year," I protested. "Surely that's too soon." She shook her head firmly. "Age and experience in life compensate for newness to the medium. You see differently than younger artists. With more patience, more appreciation for subtle details most people overlook. Don't discount the value of that perspective." I carried her encouragement back to David's home that evening, turning it over in my mind like a newly discovered stone with unexpected facets. The possibility that my late-life artistic exploration might have merit beyond personal satisfaction was both thrilling and intimidating. "You should do it," Harold said, when I mentioned the instructor's suggestion over dinner. "Submit to exhibitions, I mean. The worst they can say is no." "And if they do?" I challenged, voicing my deeper fear. "If my work isn't good enough?" "Then you'll have learned something valuable about what to develop next," he replied simply. "Rejection is just information, Margaret, not a judgment on your worth." His perspective surprised me, a stark contrast to the Harold of our earlier years, who had approached potential failure with such anxiety that he often avoided risks entirely. This was yet another manifestation of how we both had changed through our recent crucible. David, overhearing our conversation, added his own encouragement. "Mom, I've seen how your painting has evolved just through the photos you've shared over the past year. There's something special happening there. You should pursue it." The support from both my husband and son strengthened my resolve. Upon returning home, I began researching regional watercolor exhibitions with categories for emerging artists, eventually selecting 3 with upcoming submission deadlines. The process of photographing my work, writing artist statements, and completing applications was unfamiliar and occasionally frustrating, but Harold provided technical assistance without taking over the process. "You know," I observed one evening as we reviewed digital images of my paintings, "a year ago I wouldn't have attempted any of this. I would have assumed it wasn't meant for someone like me, someone my age, someone without formal training. A year ago I wouldn't have known how to help you with the digital submissions," Harold replied. "We've both stretched in ways neither of us anticipated." By late May, I had received responses from all 3 exhibitions, 1 rejection and 2 acceptances, including a regional show with significant visibility in the art community. The validation was sweet, but almost secondary to the satisfaction of having taken the risk, of putting my work before judges whose only consideration was its quality, rather than my age or background. "We should celebrate," Harold declared when the final acceptance arrived. "This is a genuine achievement." "It feels self-indulgent to make such a fuss," I demurred, the old habit of minimizing my accomplishments surfacing despite my efforts to overcome it. "Nonsense," he countered firmly. "If David had been accepted to a prestigious industry conference, wouldn't we celebrate? If Elizabeth received recognition for her hospital administration work, wouldn't we acknowledge that? Your artistic achievement deserves the same respect." His insistence on treating my creative pursuits with the same seriousness as our children's professional accomplishments touched me deeply. For so many years, I had accepted the subtle devaluation of traditionally feminine interests and activities. Harold's deliberate elevation of my art to the status of real work represented yet another evolution in our relationship. We celebrated with dinner at a new restaurant that had opened downtown, inviting James and a few other friends I'd made through my watercolor and piano communities. The evening was filled with genuine conversation about art, music, and creative expression, topics that would have rarely dominated our social gatherings in previous years. "You're glowing, Margaret," James observed as we waited for dessert. "Success clearly agrees with you." "It's not just the exhibition acceptances," I replied thoughtfully. "It's the process of discovering capabilities I never knew I had, of taking risks I would have avoided before." "That's the real victory," he agreed. "The external recognition is just confirmation of what you've already accomplished internally." Across the table, Harold was engaged in animated conversation with Leslie, my piano teacher, about the mathematical patterns in Bach's compositions. Watching him genuinely interested in a topic so different from his professional background, I felt a surge of appreciation for how he too had expanded beyond former limitations. As spring gave way to summer, my painting was featured in both exhibitions, receiving favorable mentions in local arts publications. I continued teaching monthly workshops at the community center, finding unexpected fulfillment in helping others discover their own creative potential. Harold's technology program expanded to include special sessions for grandparents learning to use social media to connect with younger family members. Our individual pursuits flourished, yet our connection deepened rather than diminished, each of us bringing richer experiences and perspectives to our shared life. The planned Greece trip was confirmed for September, with an itinerary that balanced structured activities with time for independent exploration. "I've been thinking," Harold said one evening as we sat on the porch, watching fireflies illuminate the summer dusk, "about what we might do for my birthday in August." His 83rd birthday was approaching, a milestone that carried additional significance given his heart scare 5 years earlier, when doctors had warned of potentially limited years ahead. "Did you have something in mind?" I asked, expecting perhaps a family dinner or small gathering of friends. "I'd like to renew our vows," he said quietly. "Not a big ceremony or anything elaborate. Just us, our children, maybe a few close friends. Something to mark not just another year of life, but a new understanding of what our marriage means now." The suggestion caught me completely by surprise. Vow renewals had always seemed somewhat performative to me, public recommitments that often appeared designed more for others' approval than genuine relationship affirmation. "Why?" I asked, needing to understand his motivation. Harold turned to face me, his expression thoughtful in the fading light. "Because the promises we made 61 years ago were made by different people with different understandings of what marriage meant. I want to make new promises based on who we are now, promises that honor both our connection and our individuality." His explanation resonated with my own feelings about our transformed relationship. The traditional vows we had exchanged as young people, particularly my promise to obey, no longer reflected the partnership we had developed through our recent challenges. "I'd like that," I said, reaching for his hand, "but with one condition." "What's that?" We write our own vows, completely new ones that reflect what we've learned and who we've become. Harold squeezed my hand, his smile visible even in the gathering darkness. Absolutely. Nothing less would do justice to our journey. The vow renewal ceremony took place in our backyard on Harold's 83rd birthday, beneath the shade of the oak tree that had witnessed so many family gatherings over the decades. David and Elizabeth had arranged everything: simple decorations, a small cake, champagne for toasting. Our grandchildren scattered flower petals along the grass path where I would walk to meet Harold. James, Leslie, and a few other close friends joined our family circle, their presence representing the expanded community we had each developed over the past year. I wore a knee-length dress in pale blue rather than traditional white, a color Cheryl had once told me brought out the best in my watercolor work. Harold wore a new shirt in complementary blue, with the bow tie our grandchildren had given him for Christmas. No formal wedding attire, but thoughtful choices that reflected our current selves rather than conventional expectations. Our longtime family friend and minister, Reverend Thomas, conducted the brief ceremony, acknowledging both our 61 years together and the significant transformation of the past year. Marriage is not a static state, but a living relationship, he observed. What Harold and Margaret demonstrate today is the courage to evolve together, to acknowledge both struggles and growth, to commit anew based on deeper understanding of themselves and each other. When the time came to share our newly written vows, Harold spoke first, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. Margaret, 1 year ago I nearly lost you through my own failure to see you clearly and value you completely. Today I make these new promises with full awareness of both your strength and my weakness. I promise to see you, not just as my wife, but as Margaret, a woman of talent, courage, and remarkable resilience. I promise to make space for your growth and independence, recognizing that your fulfillment enriches rather than threatens our bond. I promise honesty, even when it's difficult, and the humility to acknowledge my mistakes rather than defending them. I promise to earn your trust day by day, understanding it is a gift rather than an entitlement. Most of all, I promise to love you not out of habit or dependency, but as a daily choice, a conscious decision to appreciate the extraordinary woman you are and the partnership we continue to create together. As Harold concluded, I blinked back tears, struck by how perfectly his words captured the transformation and how he now related to me. When my turn came, I took a deep breath and spoke the promises I had carefully crafted over many thoughtful hours. Harold, our 61 years together have been a journey neither of us could have imagined when we first exchanged vows. Through joy and pain, through growth and struggle, we have arrived at this moment with clearer understanding of both ourselves and each other. I promise to remain true to myself, to nurture my own passions and potential, knowing that bringing my whole self to our relationship creates authentic connection rather than division. I promise to speak my needs and perspectives honestly, no longer assuming you should intuit them or that expressing them diminishes my love for you. I promise forgiveness that acknowledges pain without being defined by it, that allows growth, without forgetting the lessons hard-won through difficulty. I promise to see you completely, your strengths and flaws, your efforts and struggles, and to love the real man rather than an idealized image that neither of us could sustain. Finally, I promise to continue choosing this relationship each day, not out of obligation or fear, but because the Harold you are now and the Margaret I am becoming can build something stronger and truer than what we had before. As I finished speaking, I noticed tears on Harold's cheeks, an emotional display he would have carefully controlled in earlier years. Our grandchildren exchanged glances, perhaps surprised by the raw honesty of our vows, so different from the traditional promises they might have expected from octogenarian grandparents. By the renewal of these vows, you reaffirm your commitment to marriage as equal partners, with clear eyes and open hearts, Reverend Thomas concluded. May this new chapter bring continued growth, deeper understanding, and abundant joy. The small gathering erupted in applause as Harold and I sealed our renewed commitment with a kiss that held more genuine emotion than many we had shared in recent decades. As we turned to face our family and friends, I felt a profound sense of authenticity. That these promises, unlike our original vows, truly reflected who we were and what we were pledging to each other. The celebration that followed was relaxed and joyful, with Italian-inspired food we had prepared together, stories, and toasts from our children, and even an impromptu piano performance where I played a simple piece I had been practicing secretly for the occasion. As evening approached, our grandchildren organized an awkward but enthusiastic dance party on the patio, insisting that Harold and I take the first turn. "We haven't danced in years," I protested, as our oldest grandson selected a slow jazz standard. "Then it's definitely time to start again," Harold replied, taking my hand and leading me to the makeshift dance floor. As we moved together in the soft glow of string lights, I rested my head against his shoulder, a familiar gesture that now carried new meaning. We were no longer simply performing the expected role of long-married couple, but consciously choosing this intimacy, this moment of connection amid the independent lives we had each developed. "Happy birthday, Harold," I murmured. "And happy new beginning." He tightened his arms around me slightly, his cheek against my hair. "The best gift I could have received," he replied. "Another chance to love you better." As our family and friends joined us on the dance floor, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 16 months, from the devastating discovery of Harold's affair to this moment of genuine recommitment. Not a simple recovery of what was lost, but the creation of something new and potentially stronger from the fragments of what had been broken. What my husband hadn't expected when he cheated on me after 60 years of marriage was that his betrayal would ultimately lead us both toward greater authenticity, deeper understanding, and a more conscious choice to build a relationship worthy of our remaining years together. The Greece trip in September unfolded with a different energy than our Italy adventure the previous year. Where Tuscany had represented a tentative exploration of our new dynamic, Greece felt like a confident expression of who we had become, both individually and together. Our small tour group, similar in composition to the Italy gathering, quickly noted the ease between us. "You two have the most balanced relationship I've seen in a long-married couple," observed Sophia, a retired psychologist from Vancouver. "Neither dominant nor subservient to each other. It's quite remarkable." "It's fairly new, actually," Harold admitted with characteristic honesty. "We're still learning." Each day brought new discoveries. The crystalline waters of the Aegean, the breathtaking vistas of Santorini, the ancient ruins of Athens. I filled sketchbooks with watercolor studies of whitewashed buildings against cerulean skies, while Harold photographed architectural details and historical sites that captured his imagination. Unlike previous travels where Harold had typically determined our daily activities, we now alternated decision-making or separated for individual explorations before reuniting to share our experiences. The pattern felt natural now, no longer requiring explicit negotiation or careful boundary setting. One evening, as we sat at a small taverna overlooking the harbor in Mykonos, Harold posed a question that caught me by surprise. "Have you thought about what you want to do with your paintings longer term? Beyond local exhibitions, I mean." I considered his question while watching fishing boats return as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. I hadn't really thought that far ahead. "Why do you ask?" I was talking with Marcus from our tour group. He mentioned that his daughter runs a gallery in Chicago that specializes in featuring older artists who've come to their work later in life. He thought your watercolors might interest her. The suggestion represented a step beyond anything I had contemplated, moving from local community recognition to potential commercial representation. "Do you think my work is ready for something like that?" "I do," Harold replied without hesitation. "But more importantly, several people with professional art backgrounds seem to think so too." Cheryl, your workshop instructor in Boston, Marcus, with his gallery connections. It seems presumptuous somehow, I admitted. To think of myself as a real artist, worthy of gallery representation. Harold reached across the table to cover my hand with his. That's the old Margaret talking. The one who diminished her talents and achievements to avoid appearing proud or ambitious. The Margaret I've come to know this past year is braver than that. His gentle challenge registered the truth in my hesitation, the lingering habit of minimizing my capabilities despite the growth I had experienced. You're right, I acknowledged. It's still difficult sometimes, stepping fully into this new self-understanding. For both of us, Harold agreed. I still catch myself slipping into old patterns, expecting you to handle certain things automatically or making decisions without proper consultation. The habits of 60 years don't disappear overnight. But we're getting better at recognizing them, I noted. At course correcting when we notice the backsliding. Harold nodded, his expression thoughtful in the soft evening light. So, the gallery possibility. Would you like me to get Marcus's daughter's information? No pressure either way, just an option to consider. I gazed out at the Mediterranean sunset, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, colors I would have once considered beyond my artistic ability to capture, but now viewed as an interesting challenge. Yes, I decided. I'd like to explore the possibility. Even if nothing comes of it immediately, it's good to consider new horizons. Harold smiled, genuine pleasure in his expression. That's what I love about who we're becoming, Margaret. The willingness to consider new horizons at an age when most people have permanently narrowed their view. Throughout the remainder of our Greek adventure, I found myself contemplating potential next steps in my artistic journey. The watercolor studies I created each day seemed to reflect this forward-looking perspective. More confident brushstrokes, more willingness to experiment. With technique, less concern about achieving perfection on first attempt. Harold, too, seemed energized by new possibilities. During a walking tour of Athens, he engaged our guide in a lengthy discussion about volunteer opportunities for teaching technology skills in developing countries. There are organizations that place retired professionals in short-term assignments abroad, he explained later, using experience to build capacity in communities that need it. I've been researching options online. That sounds fascinating, I replied, genuinely interested in his enthusiasm. Would these be solo assignments or could spouses participate? Either, depending on the program and location. Some have specific roles for couples with complementary skills. He hesitated slightly. Would that be something you might consider? Not immediately, but perhaps next year? The question represented yet another evolution in our relationship. Harold not simply informing me of decisions or asking permission, but genuinely exploring whether a future possibility might align with my own interests and ambitions. I said thoughtfully. Especially if there were opportunities to connect with local artists or teaching situations where my new skills could be useful. It would depend on the specifics, of course. Of course, he agreed. Just something to research together when we return home. That phrase, research together, captured the fundamental shift in our dynamic. Major life decisions were now truly collaborative explorations rather than one person's direction with the other's accommodation. The change felt so natural now that it was almost difficult to remember how differently we had operated throughout most of our marriage. As our Greek journey concluded and we prepared to return home, I reflected on how much had changed in the 18 months since discovering Harold's affair. The betrayal had been devastating, yet it had catalyzed transformations that might otherwise never have occurred. Like the Japanese art of kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold, the fractures in our marriage had been mended in ways that highlighted rather than disguised the damage, creating something potentially more beautiful and certainly more authentic than what had existed before. Autumn brought new developments on several fronts. Marcus's daughter Rebecca visited from Chicago, reviewing my portfolio with professional assessment rather than friendly encouragement. "You have a distinctive approach to light and composition," she observed, studying a series of my watercolors spread across our dining room table. "There's technical skill here, certainly, but more importantly, a clear perspective, a way of seeing that comes through consistently in your work." "Is that good?" I asked, still uncertain how to evaluate professional artistic feedback. She smiled. "Very good. Technical skill can be developed through practice, but a unique artistic voice is much harder to cultivate. Yours reflects your life experience. There's wisdom in how you observe details others might overlook, patience in how you build layers of color and meaning." By the end of her visit, Rebecca had selected 8 paintings for an upcoming exhibition at her Chicago gallery titled Late Bloomers Artistic Emergence After 70. The show would feature work from 6 artists who had discovered or seriously pursued their creative practice later in life. "This is a significant step, Margaret," she explained as we finalized arrangements. "It introduces your work to a broader audience, establishes professional credibility, and opens possibilities for future exhibitions and sales." The validation was deeply satisfying, yet accompanied by a flutter of anxiety. What if Chicago art critics hate my work? What if it's dismissed as amateur or sentimental? "Then you'll have learned something valuable about the commercial art world," Rebecca replied pragmatically. "But I wouldn't have selected your work if I thought that would happen." There's an authenticity and quiet confidence in these paintings that resonates with viewers. Trust that. Harold's support throughout this process was unwavering, yet never overshadowing. He handled practical matters like shipping arrangements and insurance questions, while ensuring final artistic decisions remained exclusively mine. When I expressed doubts or insecurities, he listened without immediately trying to fix or dismiss them, another evolution in how we related to each other. "I'm nervous about the opening," I admitted as the exhibition date approached. "Being evaluated publicly, meeting established artists, answering questions about my artistic process when I'm still figuring it out myself." "You'll be wonderful," Harold assured me. "You have genuine passion for your work and the humility to acknowledge you're still learning. That combination is compelling, Margaret. People respond to authenticity." Elizabeth offered to accompany me to Chicago for the gallery opening, providing moral support while Harold remained home with a minor health issue, a seasonal virus he didn't want to risk spreading by traveling. "Are you sure you don't mind missing it?" I asked as I packed for the 3-day trip. "This is happening largely because of your encouragement." "It's happening because of your talent and hard work," he corrected gently. "And yes, I'm disappointed not to be there. But this is your moment to shine without worrying about me coughing in the background."